My guest today is a veteran of the FBI's acclaimed Behavioral Sciences Unit, the so-called Silence of the Lambs Division. She served as a special agent, and you will meet her as soon as we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Dreams in Action. My guest today is Dr. Patricia Lee Kirby. Dr. Kirby was the first female homicide detective with the Baltimore City Police Department. She then served as a special agent for the FBI. Her work focuses on profiling the most violent criminals. Welcome to Dreams in Action, Dr. Kirby.
Thank you.
Your work is really not for anybody with a weak stomach, is it?
No.
I want to talk a little bit about your background first, and then take us to that day where you actually decided to pursue law enforcement. Tell us a little bit about that.
My background is basically in psychology and sociology. Undergraduate work was in that area with the idea of being a social worker. And my first job was a parole officer. And while I was doing parole and probation work, I became fascinated with law enforcement and the criminal mind, and pursued a master's degree and went to the police department and worked the streets for a number of years as a patrolman, and then went into homicide as the first woman homicide detective.
That whole transition, that took only one sentence to describe. It must be a few years.
Yes, yes, yeah. It was a number of years.
So when you were a
patrolman, I call it, patrol person, whichever. Yeah.
You were fascinated by becoming or pursuing law enforcement as a full-time career. How did you even become a patrolman?
Actually, what happened is when I graduated from graduate school with my master's degree, I had worked on a joint program with Juvenile Probation Department in Boston and the Boston Police Department. And I became very interested, again, because of the psych background, in what made people tick and what made them commit the types of crimes I've seen, particularly violent crimes. And so my real interest was the human mind and violence. And when I applied to the FBI and a couple of the other federal agencies, they really encouraged policing experience first and local law enforcement. So I went to the local law enforcement first, and really enjoyed it, that I stayed a lot longer than I had planned, and then went to the FBI at a later time.
Right. So describe your first day on the job as a homicide detective. This is now when you've made that transition to be a homicide detective. What kind of work does that entail?
I think it's very awe-inspiring, and I think that what I found, I think, the most fascinating part of homicide was what it taught you about your own mental capabilities and about your own ability to deal with adversity. And I mean, I had not, prior to being a police officer, I had not been exposed to a lot of violence. My upbringing had not been in the inner city. And so the whole idea of seeing a dead corpse was something relatively new to me, even though I had worked the streets for a few years in a very rough section of Baltimore. So the idea of nightly seeing 2 and 3 and sometimes 4 homicides or attempted homicides was grueling. But I say it's awe-inspiring because it was amazing to me how your emotions can go to one part of your brain, and the need to investigate and to help and to try to figure out what happened, the analytical side of your brain clicks in and takes over. So it was very, very interesting aspect to me.
You really probably gained a lot of confidence in your ability to deal with that. But what about at night, when you actually go home to go to bed and you turn that analytical point off? Did you have trouble sleeping in the first years of your work?
I didn't, unless the case was, unless it involved a child, and I don't think anyone can rationalize the death of a child in any way, shape, or form. In Baltimore City, because it is such a high homicide rate and a very violent city, many of the killings were easy to rationalize in the way that it wouldn't hit someone you know or be a part of you or something like this, because oftentimes it was drug dealers killing other drug dealers and incidents like that. But again, like I said, if it was a child, or I found if it was a young woman around my age or that was either killed or committed suicide or something, those were the cases that were very, very tough to forget about on the drive home in the mornings.
Mm-hmm. And you're a PhD in sociology and justice. Is that required for the type of work you did with the police department?
No, it's not.
At that point, it was not.
No, it wasn't.
Now, how do you begin to solve a crime? So say you arrive upon a murder scene. There's a corpse, like you said. And what clues do you look for? How long does it take? What analysis do you do?
Well, very much in the police department, very much what you're doing is forensics and what is the physical evidence. In Baltimore City, as in most large cities, the homicide detective becomes the individual in charge of the entire scene. No matter what commanding officers you might have there, the homicide detective takes over and runs the investigation in the way that they see fit. Crime lab's called in, any type of support staff that you need is brought into the scene, but it's really basically, and the patrolmen are there gathering the evidence, talking to witnesses. They brief you when you arrive on the scene, because homicide is called in secondary to the patrolmen, are the first ones on the scene, and they quickly brief you. You determine what witnesses you might want to come downtown, who you might want to talk to right there on the scene, what type of tests you want run at the scene, anything of an evidentiary nature or a physical or forensic nature you decide at the scene. What then happens is you usually will then bring the individuals downtown to the homicide unit and begin to interrogate or interview or whatever, and really begin to piece it together. Because oftentimes the scenes are very frenetic, and you may not have the full information at that point. You're going on what one police officer tells you or one or the other, and at the point at which, usually like within an hour of the investigation, you have your facts pretty well lined up, that you can begin to then figure what leads you need to pursue at that point.
And now, is the scene calm? Is everybody very calm and writing notes down and collecting evidence, or is it so chaotic or shouting? I'm trying to picture in my mind what a crime scene would look like, with everybody trying to find clues and details and try to dig deeper.
It depends. It depends on the type of homicide you're going. If it's a homicide in someone's home, in which a body has been found the next day or someone hasn't reported to work, and you go in and it's obvious that it was a sexual assault type homicide, or a killing and a robbery type thing, the scene, usually you are one of few people there. You may be two detectives, the patrolman, a couple of patrolmen, crime lab, and a lot of your activity is involved at the scene, looking through and trying to piece together what the last parts of this person, what brought them home, who might have been with them, did they let somebody in, did they come home with somebody, and you're beginning to put it together there. So you have a lot more time and a lot more solitude at that point, and there's a lot more calm. Or you might end up at a incident like one that I had, one of the first very, I guess, frenetic type of incidents I had as a new homicide detective, was a shooting in the middle of the summertime in a project area in Baltimore, in which a man had come out, he was drunk, shot a shotgun in the neighborhood at all different people, and while running back to a home, a little 3-year-old child was killed. And she was killed by the gunfire of police officers. And so it was a racially tense situation. One officer was white, one was black, the victim was black. And so by the time I arrived on the scene there,
it was crazy.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
And then you have cameras and news and everyone else.
Right.
So
we're going to go to a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about your experience being the first female homicide detective, what you went through, and how you made the transition to the FBI. So stay with us. We'll be right back. And my guest today is Dr. Patricia Lee Kirby. And Dr. Kirby worked with the FBI as a special agent, and now she does consulting work, and she's had the most colorful career, and this is one way that people follow their dream in their life, and it's the most perfect career for her. Dr. Kirby, you were the first female homicide detective at that time.
Right.
Did you have to overcome some discrimination or some mistrust by your male colleagues, or any? How was that whole experience being the first woman?
It was interesting. One of the things that I think occurred at the time was the police departments, when I was in law enforcement and starting, much of the entry of women as patrolmen and then again in the FBI as special agents was relatively new. So by the second or third year that I was actually a police officer and on the street, most every section of the Baltimore City Police Department had become, as I called it, co-ed. And homicide was the last unit, and mainly because women had really only been on the streets 3 to 4 years max, and most of the men needed or were required to, not required, but it was preferred that they have 8 years or so street time before going into homicide. So the biggest difficulty was going into the unit with a lack of, with less experience than the men. And it was difficult, not necessarily from the standpoint of not being able to kind of catch up on the learning curve, but it was the idea of not paying my dues quite to the point that the men had in order to go into the unit. But pretty soon, what I found in police work, which I liked a lot, was we were so busy, whether it was working the streets or whether it was working in homicide, we were so busy that it was not long before you could very quickly prove yourself and prove that you could do it. And so soon that began to kind of dispel. But
of course,
at the beginning it was a little difficult. I mean, I had sergeants and lieutenants who had never supervised women. I had a sergeant that was scared to death to let me go on the street, you know, and I mean, there were all kinds of, it was very new for them, and so much of the attitude was not meant to be discriminatory, but, you know, and they also didn't want to face the idea that if I got hurt, the ramifications on them of having had the first female detective shot or, you know, or killed. Yeah. So it was a lot of adjustment for all of us, but it was interesting. It was very interesting.
And then you made the switch from the police department to the FBI, where you were only one of 5 female candidates
in my
within
training
your class.
class.
In your
yes,
training class
yes,
at that time.
At the time, and I think there
Out
were
of about
only
50
maybe
guys.
Yes, and I think at the time that I entered the bureau, I think there were maybe 97 female agents in the entire bureau. So
and
it was
how many
still,
agents were total?
I think there's 5,000-7,000 agents
so
total. So it was very new there too.
So everywhere you went, you were sort of breaking the ice.
It was new, yes, a new experience. So, and I enjoyed it. I mean, the behavioral background that I had enjoyed, and I mean, I have always attributed to the fact that I have 2 rather wild brothers that I grew up between, and so I was very used to
and it worked
being
out great for
around
you.
brothers and men. So it was not, you know, it was not something that frightened me, and I was used to guys. So I mean, it was interesting.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about the FBI. You actually were profiled in this book because you were so successful as an agent. This is the FBI book, Inside the World's Most Powerful Law Enforcement Agency. This is like the Bible on the FBI, and you were right in there. I want to just go to a little quote, a quotation actually, of what you're saying when you were asked a question. And you're saying, I remember when I was a rookie cop, I was told if the FBI comes after you, they're going to get you. We have just so much time and manpower. Once the Bureau starts after you, they're going to get you, and you're not going to get away from the FBI. Was that intimidating in some ways?
Yes, and it was, you know, and I think, again, there is this mystique that surrounds the FBI, even from local law enforcement. Even though there's a lot of friction between local law enforcement and the Bureau, there is a mystique about the FBI that is not around the other federal agencies, and that's not around any other law enforcement agency. And so it did, I think there was It is.
Was it a dream come true for you, in a sense, to be accepted into the force and to be? You had to get the additional degree, right? A PhD in sociology and justice at that time.
No, not to go to the bureau. To go to the behavioral science unit, I needed a master's. But the bureau was a college degree, and they wanted 3 to 5 years experience, some type of professional experience. For me, one of the reasons I went to the FBI, and it's interesting because when I talk to my students now in criminology, particularly, and they say, I want to do exactly what you did. How did you do it? And I'll say, by being very, very open to opportunities that came along. While I was in Homicide, I loved Homicide, and I really kind of forgot about going to the FBI. But I met Bob Ressler and a couple of the individuals who were the founders of the behavioral science unit. And in talking with them about the motivation for serial killers and for really violent people, I became fascinated and wanted to go to the FBI to join the behavioral science unit. So, and I did have the master's degree, which I needed to go to that unit. So that really became my dream. And on joining the bureau, I spent 5 years on the street as a street agent. Was then eligible to go to Quantico, and was promoted and went to Quantico.
Wonderful. When we come back, we're going to take another short break, and we're going to come back. I want to talk about Silence of the Lambs. And apparently the author that wrote the book interviewed you before the movie came out.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes.
So stay with us. It's very interesting. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Dreams in Action. My guest today is Dr. Patricia Kirby, and we just got started to talk about the movie Silence of the Lambs, and actually you meeting and speaking with the author of that book.
Right.
Tell us about that.
When he was originally creating the storyline for the book, he called Bob Ressler at the Behavioral Science Unit, who I said was a friend of mine, and we had lunch together. Bob said, I'd like it. Did not tell me at the time that Tom Harris was thinking of writing the book with a female as the prime agent in the investigation, and was kind of just checking the feasibility of what it would be like to have a woman as the main agent and what all. So we met, had lunch, and it was later that I found out kind of the purpose of the lunch at a different time. So yes, it was interesting too.
Did you see some similarities when you actually saw the movie in terms of what you'd said and had
Some,
suggested?
yes.
Wasn't that neat?
It was very neat. I mean, she had a psych background, and I mean, the movie,
was based
of course,
on you,
made it much more elaborate, and everything was far more exciting in ways, but, I mean, about the whole unit. But still, there were some, and I think, the basic attitude and all that she had and all was very similar.
In your career, did you ever meet cannibals? Like that?
There were some. We did some interviews with, when on the serial murder still, and child molesters and child killers and stuff. And there were some very strange. And I have run into a couple of strange, doing research on my own, a couple of very strange murders.
Talk about some of these, some of the cases that you've covered. Some of them are pretty high profile. There's the one case about a county commissioner, and you had to pretend to be a high-class call girl.
Right. That was undercover. I did a number of undercover assignments when I first went as a street agent, when I first went with the Bureau. And a lot because I had a police background and had been trained. And again, like I said, the level of experience among female agents with prior law enforcement experience was not high. So one of the assignments that I did was a high-class call girl in a political corruption cases in the South, in which the bribes were carnal bribes instead of monetary bribes. And so we went down, and a number of the incidents were filmed and were later used in some of the training tapes and everything for some of the agents and some of the assistant U.S. attorneys. But it was that was an interesting case. I did some other. The book mentions in foreign counterintelligence when we were covering an exchange at the airport.
Yes, tell us about that one. At
BWI. Yes, and
Airport.
there was an exchange going on, and it was to take place in a cocktail lounge, and so I was the cocktail waitress for the folks involved and the targets that we were looking. So
Now,
they
what
were-
happens when you swoop in into BWI Airport, take over a lounge, and you all of a sudden put on a little apron and start carrying? I mean, do the owners, I mean, do they accept that right away? Or?
Well, they do. Well, what we usually do is set it all up first. And I mean, I had my little name tag and the outfit and everything else. And we go down and run through it and decide where we're going to have cameras and microphones and all of this throughout the place, where we need them to sit in order to get the best angles and in order to get the information, how we're going to do it. Are we going to, at that point, after after the exchange has occurred, are we going to do the bus then, or are we going to wait and let the people go to their gates? How we basically want to do it. And so there's a dress rehearsal and kind of a plan ahead of time. But I mean, at that point, the bartender was an FBI agent and on. I mean, it's just.
So what did you have to do? Did you have to actually go up to the table and take an order from the suspects?
Yes, I did. But yes, and part of my role also was, with any operation like that, not only do you need it on tape and everything, you want an agent or agents available to be able to testify in court and to be able to write down exactly what they're hearing and exactly what's going on, to also testify to the tape, and whether it be the visual tapes or the audio tapes. So, I mean, that was basically my role. And the thing that we found in using women in undercover is people tend to be able to, there's a lot more distrust for a man. But there's a lot, suspects will let women in a lot easier because, one, there's not a stereotyping of what a female FBI agent should look like, and the other is people are just more relaxed about letting women into that inner circle.
Have you had counseling yourself after a particularly horrific experience or horrific case where you know you need to sort of talk to somebody? Do they have professionals that help? Psychiatrists?
They do, yes, they do within
just
the
to debrief and just to unload.
Just it. And I think, though, but what I found is I think that you really need kind of an ongoing outside interest and outside support.
To put it out of your mind.
You need personal support. The individuals, whether it be police officers, homicide detectives, that I see that the job gets to them, isolate themselves from others and from other outside activities.
And they let the work consume them.
Right, exactly.
Do you still carry a gun?
At times, yes.
At times?
I have a gun permit for certain areas.
Do you?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
We are so privileged to have you. Thank you so much for coming to my show. I really appreciate it, Dr. Kirby.
Thank you.
Thanks. It was
It was great.
fascinating, very interesting.
Thanks.
And thank you for tuning in to Dreams in Action.